This is episode 99 of our road to Unicum, and today I review the Setter, the new British Tier 7 light tank in World of Tanks, and I'm going to be talking quite a bit about that line as I progress up it. So far, I have played the 38 battles in the Setter to unlock the Tier 8 LHM TV, and I've also played that tank for, I think it was 79 battles is what it took me to unlock the Tier 9 British light tank. I can't remember the name. Thankfully these days, if you have a premium subscription, grinding out tanks goes a lot faster because you have those up to 5 daily win bonuses that you can apply so that you can more quickly grind out the experience for tanks. I found that to be super helpful, and generally speaking, I try to grind out as many of the modules as possible after making sure that I have a gun that is functional. Okay, so the British light tanks. No doubt if you haven't lived under a rock, you've heard the huge kerfluffle about the British light tanks, namely that their damage per minute, the DPM, is just simply horrid compared to the peers, the tanks on its peers. As a matter of fact, if you think about the Tier 7 Setter, it has a base of under 1400 damage per minute, which is worse than some Tier 4 tanks. So you're talking about a Tier 7 tank that can't even compete DPM-wise with tanks 3 tiers lower. And so that limits a lot of what you can do in this tank, or rather you have to really be careful about how you choose to engage with enemy tanks. So where you see me now, I would typically not go here. I would go typically where our 1357 is, by that hill, to be able to spot some of that crescent around the B and C lanes. Or I might go south toward the big hill around F6, F7. Now, I haven't done that for a few reasons. If I go down to where our 1357 is, that T71DA, which is a very strong Tier 7 light tank because it's autoloader, that tank could clip me out. Right, 6 shells at 150 damage each. It's 900 potential clip damage. That's more hit points than I've got here. And so with a tank like this that has such poor DPM, and beyond that, the Setter also has paper armor. Right, you have to be extraordinarily careful how you pick your spots. And it also means, for example, I don't want to end up out in the open against one of their wheeled vehicles. Right, in this case, they've got the EBR Hotchkiss, which is an excellent vehicle. Because the high explosive would very easily penetrate the worthless paper armor on this tank. I mean, matter of fact, the Setter is like one of the lightest tanks in the game. It only weighs like 8k kilograms. It's paper thin. It's super easy to run over and squish in terms of RAM. So I've gone up to this area here, C2, and normally I hate it when light tanks come up here. I personally almost never come up here in early game. But as it turns out, I don't feel like there's necessarily a lot that I can do. I don't want to get stuck in the open where I can get dumped on by their 3 RDs or simply out DPM'd by their light tank. So I've come up on this ridge where I can use the one thing that I have that's really helpful from the Setter. Well, there are a couple things it has, but the one thing which is super helpful is it has 10 degrees of max gun depression, which means it's very good at ridge fighting. And the thing about brawling or ridge fighting is, generally speaking, you can cover up deficiencies in your reload by simply, after you fire, pulling back behind the ridge or behind hard cover. Now, up till I ate that shot from the King Tiger, it's actually doing really well. It already inflicted close to 800 damage, and the fact that, again, the reload is terrible is partially masked by the fact that I can pull back behind hard cover. Okay, so a couple other things about the tank that are on the positive side. They don't, by the way, in any sense balance out the horrid damage per minute, but the tank has superb camouflage. It has a small profile, so it's a hard target to hit. It's a difficult target to spot if you play the vision game correctly. And the silver AP penetration of 180 for a light tank at Tier 7 is exceptional. So, as you guys know, I haven't used any premium ammo rounds in random battles on this account, but it's nice to feel that when I'm using my silver ammo on a tank like this, that the probability of penetration is really high. And right here, see this, I've got the first shot advantage on that SU, right? I could see he's not turreted, he's crossing laterally right to left. Moreover, he had been hit by Artie, so it gives me a free shot. Didn't land it in a way that penetrated, and I don't want to go up and take a peek now, because the SU-122 44 would have the first shot advantage because he knows where I would be likely to peek. I don't want to trade my puny 135 alpha with his big alpha. And again, this is part of the thing. Like, some tanks have poor DPM, but that's partially offset either because they're an autoloader so they can pack in very compact burst, or they have large alpha. This is true especially of the high caliber guns and tank destroyers. However, this tank has poor DPM and low alpha. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't win games in it. You know, in the 38 battles that I played, I did 33 of those battles solo. The 5 battles that I happened to platoon with a friend, the Pig She Flies from Simp, we actually lost 3 out of the 5 battles. So I think running solo mathematically, that puts me close to a 65% solo win rate in this tank. And I think what's really interesting is that this tank is so fragile, it makes me have to be extremely thoughtful in what I'm doing. Now, we're in a bad situation. The reason why I backed up to this G3 area is this allows me to spot and to shoot their tanks as they roll down this hill. They haven't done it yet, but okay, the Panther's coming. I place that shot, get a tracking shot on him. He happens to spot me. You can see here, to some extent, I wasn't expecting him to spot me, even though it was within the white circle. I thought, you know, he wouldn't spot me from this distance. That would certainly be true of heavies and most TDs on the move, since a lot of TDs players don't bother to equip optics. Now, the important thing is our Tiger's been holding his edges like a champ, and what he's doing is a smart thing, like just stay alive. Like, he doesn't want to force an engagement where he's going to get shot at twice just to get off one shot. That's simply not smart, and this King Tiger was trying to flank, coming around on the inside, which is something that you should never do in a slow tank unless you are sure that area is safe to cross, right? But the good thing is, where our Tiger P is, the King Tiger is facing an SU-122-44. If they want to fire on the King Tiger, they have to go over and around the corner. And of course, our arties are going to be super incentive to dump on these guys, right? But the nice thing is, now I can come behind and flank these guys. I take out the SU, and the King Tiger is now in a really bad spot. You know, he's either going to be giving up his armor to me for easy shots, or to the King Tiger. To our Tiger P. Our Tiger P puts him down. Literally, Tiger P is what kept us in the game. He just smartly sat there, kept them proxy spotted, and they no doubt know, the enemy tanks, that they peek around the corner, that they're going to get smacked by Artie. Now, right there, I think that was a preventable hit that I took from their M12 Artie. I had assumed incorrectly that I had dropped from being spotted. Probably should have waited a few more seconds, because the thing is, like, if you're like in your 9th or 10th second of being spotted and you start to move in a vector, you may drop from their spotting, but their arties or other tanks, if they've got a line of sight, can project where you're going and aim for that position, right? And like, up to this point, I had like maintained well over half of my hit points. Now this gets a little bit dicier. You know, I could be two-shot by their, you know, EKV, and or because it's a paper tank, Artie could easily, you know, one-shot me for my remaining hit points. But to some extent, I need to stay reasonably aggressive here. That's super lucky. And you'll notice I have high explosive loaded because the EKV has paper armor. And so I do carry, you know, a handful of shells here. The nice thing about the high explosive for this particular tank, and I don't think it's really relevant once you get to the tier 8 tank, but for the tier 7 tank, the high explosive round has pretty good penetration of 75. Like, it's not glorious penetration like the French wheeled light tanks have, but it's still enough that it's worth, you know, loading out some high explosive, because the alpha of the high explosive is around 175 compared to the 135 alpha for the excellent AP ammo on this tank. And again, the shells themselves are really good in this tank. That's not the issue. It's just the DPM. And I would say it would be fair, given that this tank has such high silver penetration, if it had a lower DPM compared to, you know, the other tier 7 light tanks. But the other tier 7 light tanks have, you know, damage per minute that's like, I think offhand, like, you know, at or around 2K. And so there's a huge discrepancy, right? And so that's probably what's imbalanced. Now, the part which can be rough here is, so we know where their Shuramil is, and thankfully, you know, our Tiger P has pushed up carefully and is hiding behind rocks and such, but I don't know where their setter is, right? And as a matter of fact, so their setter spotted, he's AFK, and, you know, these people who do this in battles, it's so really, like, it's so unfair to the rest of the team. Like, I understand some of these people will queue, and, you know, they'll get a phone call or something will happen, they have to take it, but really their setter blew their chances of winning. And even though this setter's a really bad tank, let me rephrase it. The setter is extremely limited in its combat potential, right, in terms of offense. And watch, I'm going to cleverly use the bushes here, so move up so that the bush is always between me and that Artie, and go ahead and shoot and then back up behind the buildings. Now, if I wanted to be even more careful, I could have backed up in a line directly away from that S51, where the bush then becomes solid. So even when I fire, they already can't spot me. And, you know, he's he's been hit by our arty, which means his aiming is going to go to crap. And right here, I make a horrible decision. Like, all I need to do, I was already doing the right thing. All I had to do was do it a third time, back up behind the bush and shoot him. And it's possible, like, could you imagine, like, if I died and then they managed to kill our E25 and then we draw, right? That would have been totally my fault because I just got sloppy at the very end. But, you know, what you can see here in that battle was just a very careful set of decisions. Really the only decision that I made in hindsight, and I realized it while I was doing it, was after we went and we got the EKV TD kill that was getting near our base and at risk of spotting our arties, was when I went down into the valley. The really safe thing to do, the smartest, safest thing to do would have been to pull a full clockwise loop around the map, because I went down into the valley kind of toward the middle section. It's possible. At the time, I didn't know that their setter was AFK, but if he was hiding anywhere in a bush that was spotting the middle to southern valley, he would have spotted me first, potentially shot at me. Even worse, you know, Artie can fire on me. But, you know, as it turned out, he was AFK. Really unfortunate for their team. So I want to show you a tier 9 battle. You know, the great thing with the MM that was released in late 1.4, that MM has been a godsend, frankly, because you get so many more same tier matches, or matches where there is no more than a 1 tier difference between tanks. Now, since I've been spotted here, I really shouldn't sit here. That really, taking one shot in the T-71 DA was about as much as I should have done. I really shouldn't have been sitting there, because he's the one with the rock in the bush. He's going to outspot me. He could have clipped me out. I think that's really the only mistake I make in this game, but that was really not very smart. Now, I do not agree with whether T-71 DA has gone, the one that's closest to us over at C6, because he's effectively pinned himself. He can't leave that rock without getting shot at. He has no clear exit path, and when you watch me play light tanks, you'll almost never see me go to a position like that where I can't get out on my own. I don't have an exit route, and that's why, for example, this shelf that I'm on is so powerful, because I can choose to move back behind the wall whenever I want. So, for example, just take a little shot there on that Super Pershing, just take off a little bit of health, and the main thing is just try to be patient about working in the gun. And the thing that's, you know, a little bit hard about this tank, obviously the reload is under 5 seconds, but, you know, once you're spotted, you should typically plan for about 10 seconds before you're no longer spotted, and if you're not sure, just wait a little longer. And you can see their T-71's peeking out behind the rock now. He's not long for this earth, right? He's getting fired. You can see the arty tracer go overhead, firing at that T-71. And actually, the rear T-71 that was over by B5 is also dead. I'm not a fan of going to B5 where their other T-71 DA went, for the same reason. You can just kind of get stuck up there and you can't move very well. Same thing for the setter, especially in a match where there's 2 arties per side. You're just really, at this point, you're so close that you're going to get spotted based on distance, and there aren't bushes nearby that you can, you know, reliably and repeatedly use to make sure you get the first shot advantage. All right, now, it is possible I'm within range where they could theoretically spot me. Most likely they won't. The setter won't spot me unless I fire my gun, or like I fire here on this Super Pershing and get lit, but that's okay. I can hide behind this little area here and make this a very difficult shot for that setter. And, you know, our T-69 and M4A1 know, and the IS-6 know that the setter's there. So if he pokes his head out, there's a high likelihood that he's going to get shot. Again, that's very much something you don't want to do with a light tank. You know, put yourself into a position where you've you've self-trapped yourself, right? Whereas the position I'm in, very, very strong. And it's going to be amazing, because you're going to see how the mobility of a light tank is going to come in pretty importantly later on in this battle. Now, the one thing you have to be careful of as you're peeking out in these bushes here is, you know, arties will sometimes fire it, or, you know, snipers will sometimes blind fire it, and it's exposed to fire from the southern hill. But granted, if they're there in the southern hill, I can choose when okay, so for example there I just got hit by the EKV, but he hit, it looks like, probably the upper part of the turret where the observation device is, and that's a totally, like, useless module of damage. Yeah, sure, it hurts my view range temporarily, but it'll pretty soon lighten up. And I'm waiting for a shot there, just looking at the top of the turret. And again, with the 180 excellent silver penetration with this, you know, gun, it can very reliably penetrate opponents. Okay, so they haven't really put too many tanks on the South Hill. It's just the standard B and the UDES 14.5. However, this really isn't a good brawling tank. You could say, well, maybe you should go South Hill because it has that awesome gun depression, but I don't want tanks to see me. I'm too fragile. If I get RD'd, I'm going to lose massive chunks of my health. And so what I'm going to help do is go around the map from a northern or counterclockwise rotation and then pick off their TDs. And then hopefully the goal would be to get to C2. Right, once I get to C2, then I can spot their tanks all along the back line, get anything killed in that northwest sniper shelf, including Artie, and then push south down the one line towards Artie. Now before I do that, I'm just going to take a quick peek here to see if I can see anything, see if that standard B is potentially going to be crossing along the F lane, and so he's not doing it. I will note, it's interesting, I sometimes find that when I play really good tanks, I actually get crappy results, and partly because, this is true for example when I played the 1357. Fantastic tank, but sometimes I will get so aggressive with it, I'll actually do poorly, and it's because I'll be trying to force doing damage with the tank. Whereas with this tank, the gun is just so flat out terrible, I have to be really careful. Now, watch this here. The Jagdtiger's not looking at me. Okay, now he's starting to turn his tank counterclockwise to face me, but until he does meaningfully get himself pointed in my direction, I can sit there and fire at him. Now granted, if I'm just sitting still, I'm potentially vulnerable to Artie, but you can see like now he's not looking at me again, so I'm just going to pull forward here and then take another shot, and he just happens to angle his hull just in time. But the Jagdtiger's got the fundamental problem. He's got to be all the way up or all the way back, right? What he's doing as he drives forward, he's putting himself into perpendicular crossing fields of fire, which makes this super easy for me just to drive behind him and then finish him off. And you know, that Charioteer, unfortunately for him, missed his shot. But he's the part of the problem they've had too is like some of their tanks are sitting too far back to actually be meaningfully relevant. Like where the Charioteer is not a place to be, not a good place to be early to mid game, and it's partly because he doesn't have enough leverage in terms of providing support. He would need to actually move a little bit southeast to fire on our T-54. That's what their Charioteer absolutely should be doing, because while their UDES and the Standard B are alive, they have a chance of winning this battle. Right, so I'm coming up here to kind of spot if there's anything up on this shelf, and because this tank has like ninja camo, you know, I'm able to get all the way up here, and I think I got spotted because I fired. But you know, the camo on this is so good, you know, it really allows you a lot of opportunities to spot and work that first shot advantage. And a lot of people say, well, the gun sucks, you just shouldn't use it. And you know, as I've said, in every tank, including lights and mediums, the winning statistically is correlating with not just assisted damage but also with dealing damage, right? Or at least unfortunately a lot of the modeling that we would like to be able to do in World of Tanks as far as how much assisted damage correlates with winning, we can't do, because while assisted damage is in the in-game statistics and it's available at an aggregate level for all the tanks you've played, it's not available at the individual tank level. Now, if you're wondering why I'm coming over to the Standard B, this is a tank which could easily clip me out, right? But he represents the biggest risk here, not the Artie. Like a lot of times people have an overemphasis in going and fighting Artie. Their Standard B has enough health that he could clip out the UDES. He already killed the T-54, and if I'm not careful, he could potentially carry this. So I'm doing this to just bleed him of some of his hit points, and then that shot there, I think I tried it with some high explosive. It should have really just stuck with the AP. But situations like this, late game, you need to look at what tanks offer the highest threat towards your remaining tanks. In a situation where we had multiple one-shottable medium tanks, they have a high hit point Standard B, it's better to help apply some pressure on that Standard B and to help take him out. One other thing to keep in mind is people will often try to tell you where enemy players or arties are, and you kind of have to make an assessment to what extent you trust the information they're giving you. And to be completely honest, players who die early, I don't really generally pay attention to what they have to say because they're so disconnected from the actual battle unless they're rotating around different players and paying attention. And then you also have to consider what do your own eyes or common sense tell you. I already circled that map in a counterclockwise direction, didn't spot the artist, is most likely going to be in that bottom area of the map. So you can see here, like, surprisingly, 63% win rate solo, closer to 65%. Totally was not expecting these types of numbers, and I actually have been pulling close to a 70% win rate solo in the LHMTV. So I'll talk more about how to play these tanks correctly. They're the ultimate finesse tanks, and while they are bad, I wouldn't say that they're useless. I hope you enjoyed the video. Take care.